Now, we often say it because it's really true. The bottom line of Crossroads Christian Communications and 100 Huntley Street is the prayer lines. If we do not have mature, established, proven men and women there, the integrity of the ministry just, in a domino effect, suffers exponentially. And so a real focus has always been on those prayer lines because over 1,000 of you a day are calling in, and there's some really serious needs that are expressed there. Well, I wanted to highlight the quality of people we have there, and Elizabeth Danna is a terrific example. She's written a book called From Gethsemane to Pentecost. There's a copy of it right there. She has been on the lines now for 13 years, is it, Elizabeth? 15 years, 15 years. And, she's a PhD from the University of Durham. She did her PhD thesis on the Gospel of John. What was your focus there in John?
Non-Jewish characters.
Non-Jewish characters. And who would those non-Jewish characters be?
Well, I did a chapter on the Samaritan woman at the well.
Yeah.
And then a chapter on the Greeks who seek Jesus in chapter 12, and then a chapter on the Romans, focusing basically on Pilate. And basically I was talking about characterization and how John, as he's telling the story, how he portrays the characters, how he tells the story, which is a true story, in such a way as to bring out certain things that he felt needed to be said.
Now, how do you decide on a thesis like that? I mean, when you do a PhD, you have to study something that no one else has studied, right?
Yes.
So how do you discover that in all of the world, and all the libraries, and all of the academic works have been done in history, nothing's been done on the non-Jewish characters in the Gospel of John?
Well, the first thing you have to do is do a little research. There are databases that you can check that are lists of all the articles that have been published in various journals, like the Journal of Biblical Literature and the Journal of the Society for New Testament Studies and the other journals, so that you can, and books that have been written on a particular subject, so you can find out who's done what.
And you would have to have more than a facility in the Greek language, right, to do this?
Yes.
So you get along pretty well in Greek, even to this
Yes.
day? Do you ever anybody call the phone lines who's talking Greek?
No, that hasn't happened yet.
I doubt that it would.
You never know.
Although you might have somebody of Greek ethnicity.
Yes.
Now, your book, From Gethsemane to Pentecost, is really, really good timing because
Yes,
Holy
it
Week
is.
is just around the corner.
It is.
You call it a passion study, and it really is set out like a study book for
Yes,
small groups, right?
That's what it was intended for,
Now,
yes.
tell us a little bit about passion. When people hear the word passion, they think in terms of male-female love for each other. That's not what it means.
No.
What does it mean?
The original meaning of the word passion was suffering.
Huh.
And so to call what happened to Jesus that first Easter weekend was called his passion at a time when Latin was the language of the church.
Right.
And the stress is on the suffering that he went through for my sake and yours.
Yeah. And as I was reading your book, I was impressed with the fact that you, time and time again, you refer not only to the Greek words and the implications and the nuances and so on, but you also give a lot of scripture references. I mean, this is a really, this is not a fast read. You want to take your time with this, right? I think you really expect people when they're reading this, whether it's on their own or in a small group, to have their Bibles beside them, right?
Yes. And it probably needs to be said that you don't have to know Greek to understand what I've written. I explain what needs to be said.
Yeah, no, you do. And in most cases, when you give a scripture reference, you just put the quote right there, so you don't even have to scramble to find it. Although there are some places early on where that was the case. Now, when you're doing a study like this, let's talk about this specifically. You've already done your doctorate in the Gospel of John. Now you're studying Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yes.
Time and again in the course of your book, you deal with this. Now, just help me with this a bit. the perhaps untutored reader might find some inconsistencies between what Matthew says and what Mark says, Luke, John, their references. You don't seem to struggle with that. Why is that the case?
No. Well, I mean, we could take a long time talking about that, but let's sum it up by saying, first of all, the inconsistencies are not as great as some people would like to make them.
Right.
And also, one has to keep in mind that we're dealing with 4 different stories told by 4 different people. They're talking about Jesus. They're telling the same story, but they're telling it in a way that is going to be relevant to the church in their time and place. Each of the 4 Gospels was written in a different time and place, and they were all 4 of them were written within about 20 or 25 years, but they were written in different places, and the church needed to hear different things. Mark wrote his Gospel probably about 65 A.D., probably in Rome. And Matthew wrote his Gospel probably in Palestine, which we now call Israel, a few years later, probably in the early 70s. The church in Rome needed to hear something slightly different from the church in Palestine a few years later. And so that's why we have these slight variations.
And then Luke was a physician, and
Yes.
and he had to rely on what I guess you would call primary research.
Yes, that's true.
Because he had no personal experience.
No, he didn't. But he says right at the beginning of his Gospel that he has, he's checked the sources, probably talked with some witnesses who were still alive, and that's what he's used to write his story of Jesus.
A historical novel I read years and years and years ago about Luke still is with me, by Taylor Caldwell, called Dear and Glorious Physician. In fact, I don't even know if it's in bookstores anymore, but if you have a chance of picking that book up in a library or on eBay or something, friends, what a terrific book. And then she also wrote one on the Apostle Paul called Great Lion of God.
Great Lion of God, yes.
Terrific books.
That one I've read.
Now, let's shift gears a little bit. I'm really fascinated that here you are, you're a prayer partner at Crossroads, and you're there responding to people who are calling in with this rich, deep background of study and devotion and maturation. Is there a common denominator, Elizabeth, when you're responding on the phone? Like, is there a story you've heard enough times or permutations thereof that you can say, my goodness, there's a lot of people going through the same thing?
There are several.
Yeah. Give me an example of one or two.
Well, families in crisis, for example. Women who are having difficulties in their marriage or difficulties with their children, and financial difficulties. A lot of people struggling financially right now. So yes, there are certain things that we do hear over and over again, and that needs to be said, because one of the enemy's main weapons against God's people is isolation, and we think, oh, I'm the only one going through this.
Right.
Not true.
Yeah. Do you ever have someone who is just ready to commit their lives to the Lord right there? I mean, they're primed,
happens.
They're ready.
That happens, yes.
And how do you follow them up? Like, what is the process in place to make sure that these people are not lost after the phone call is over?
Well, we do have a follow-up people that at the end of the call, we ask the caller if they would like us to follow up, and if they would, we ask them for their name, address, and phone number, and that information gets passed on to someone else who calls them a few days later to see how they're doing. And
I understand there's also a connectivity in terms of local churches.
Yes, that's very important. We always encourage people to, if they're not in a good church, a good, vibrant, Bible-believing church, we encourage them to get into one, and we can help them with that. We can give them names and phone numbers of churches.
Yeah, and it's really interdenominational, right? There's no specific denominational signature here.
No.
What about those calls that come in and they are a crisis of such a nature that you feel overwhelmed by it and don't know what to do about it? Does that ever happen?
Yes, that happens too. And all you can do is lean on God.
Yeah.
Rely on God to give you what needs to be said when it needs to be said.
In terms of you've been doing this for 15 years. You've had a lot of influences in your life, academically and otherwise. What impact is this having on you personally, Elizabeth, this ministry?
Well, my own spiritual growth.
Yeah.
I think I've grown spiritually, and when I came, I had a lot of academic background, but not a lot of ministry, practical experience. And I've certainly got that here.
I guess you have. Yeah, you in many ways have a pastoral impact, and we're so glad that you're a part of the team.
Thank you.
The book is called From Gethsemane to Pentecost, Friends, by Elizabeth Danna, and it's available at our e-store. How's that? This e-store is a fairly new feature, friends. A lot of you are still getting used to this. And if you don't have a computer, it could be a problem, but you can also call 1-800-265-3100, and you can order this book. It's a terrific study, as it says, from Jesus' suffering in the garden right through to the day of Pentecost and the beginning of the early church. It's well worth the read. Believe me, I've read it myself, and I think it's terrific, and we hope that you'll get your copy. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more after this, friends.